You are listening to the Mom to Mom podcast, hosted by Stephanie Sinclair, founder and owner of How to Mom. This podcast is meant to empower women and bring the community together through storytelling and education. During these episodes, you will hear stories of triumph, heartache, and hope. You will hear time-tested tips and tricks shared by mamas and women. You will hear a variety of birth stories that will resonate with all birthing families, advice from professionals who have dedicated their teachings to pregnancy, birth, and moms. Here, you will find encouragement, support, and community, because we are your community, and we are so happy to have you. Now, on to today's episode. Hello, you guys. Thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode. We are featuring one of How to Mom's doula clients who is willing to share her very vulnerable, important, powerful, hard birth story with us today. This is a really special one for me, not only as a birth doula, but just as a fellow mom who lives in a neighborhood filled with beautiful children. Our guest today is actually a neighbor of mine. It's not always very often that I work with friends, family, neighbors, but when I do, it's very, very special. And definitely I can say that this journey together has brought us much closer. And I would like to say, I'm making an assumption on her end, but I would like to say a bond that could never be broken now. And that's on my end as well. So I am so excited. Please know that there will be some hard parts of this birth story and conversations that are extremely vulnerable for our guests. And I'm so thankful to her for sharing, because it's not always easy to share our vulnerable stories and our raw history. But what we talked about before recording this episode is the importance of not only kind of processing our own birth stories, but doing it also for those that are coming after us. And so a lot of what we're going to talk about today, I have not heard in another podcast, because it can be tough. And I'm just so thankful for her vulnerability. And I know that so many of you are going to be able to relate to this story, and you've never had another story to relate to, because people aren't able to share when there's trauma related to their birth story. So please welcome with a warm heart How to Mom client and a very good friend and neighbor of mine, Krystal. Thank you so much for being on today's episode.
Hi.
So why don't you start, Krystal? Krystal is a mom of two. Why don't you kind of start with your oldest daughter's birth story? Kind of just give us a brief insight into how that unfolded and how that experience kind of led you to the process of wanting to work with the birth doula for your second birth.
Yes. So when we got pregnant with our second, I started realizing just how much I hadn't really processed what happened when we had our first. And I started looking for a doula because of that. So when I had my first daughter, I was a little bit younger, excited, went in without much of a plan into delivery. We got scared pretty quick. I had an epidural pretty quick when we hit the hospital, and everything seemed really, really great. My water had broken before we went into the hospital, before labor even really started. And at that time, this was 2015. So this was almost 8 years ago now at this point. They were adamant at the hospital that she needed to be delivered within 24 hours. And I'd noticed my water broke when I woke up that morning. So they weren't sure at what time it happened overnight. So when I was still laboring at about midnight, they told me that I needed a C-section at that point, and that I couldn't go any longer because it was dangerous and she needed to be delivered. So that was And the recovery to that was really difficult. When I got pregnant and they were trying to figure out what happened the first time around, some details were uncovered in my medical file that I wasn't aware of the first time. And I don't know if it just got missed in the chaos of everything. I forgot in the chaos of everything. But some of those medical details really scared me this time around, especially knowing that with a C-section the first time, my chances were so high of needing to have a C-section the second time. And actually even feeling a little, not pressured, but kind of like trying to be guided in that direction. And I really wanted a VBAC. I wanted an attempt to do it again naturally. So that's what set me onto the path of looking for a doula. And I knew Stephanie because she was my neighbor, as she mentioned, and we had met a few times at that point and have kids in the similar age range. So I reached out to her to find out, like, I've heard about a doula. What exactly do they do? Is this something that maybe could support the journey that I'm trying to have this time around with this pregnancy? So Stephanie came over and met with me. You know, I was really nervous at the beginning too, of trying to like explain all of this, and then even thinking like, okay, when it sounded like this was going to be a really supportive thing to the journey that we wanted to have with our second, you know, then just trying to figure out like, okay, she's my neighbor. Do I really want to have her holding my hand during such a vulnerable time, you know, and then having to look at her face to face after she saw that. But meeting with her and talking with her, and even with having my husband there too, we both agreed. We thought that that was going to be a great route. And we brought Stephanie into the journey with us.
Yeah, and I think that's such an important point as well. And of course, you have to be comfortable and you have to feel safe. And I think sometimes too, and what we talked about was, you know, this is my career. This is extremely important work that I feel called to do. And yes, we are neighbors. And if that is something that was uncomfortable for a potential client, there is no judgment in that at all. But I think too, when we kind of sat down and talked, we were able to separate a little bit, right? That would be, although it's a very intimate relationship, right? That it felt professional in the terms of that I was there because this is the work that I'm trained to do. And that in my mind, there is absolutely no weird or awkwardness in seeing clients after, you know, serving and supporting them in the birth space. But that is a real concern for some people. And it's why we have to be so, I guess, careful as doulas, or appreciative or honored to do the work that we do, because it is such a vulnerable, raw experience. These couples and these families are inviting us into their most sacred, intimate place. And so I think too, like, just on a professional level, because, you know, of your career and things like that, you were able to see that, you know, this is a well-oiled machine in terms of a business and the professionalism and the training and the work that we do. And so I think that kind of put you a little bit at ease, or to just say, like, we can have our relationship both personally and professionally, but we can also go out and play with our kids and kind of separate the two in some aspects. But I think that's a really important conversation to have, because that's a real concern for some people. And I always loved hearing your input and just your honesty, and to be able to sit down and say, like, this is how I'm feeling, whether we, you know, want to say or admit that is like the first step, right? Like, let's like break down all the barriers. Let's take down the walls. And again, you're going to know if you feel safe to have that conversation with your potential doula. And I think we very quickly learned that we were able to do that. And I was so happy. Okay, so we decided to move forward and work together. And one of Krystal's, there was a couple of things that we worked on initially. Obviously, not only in preparation for a VBAC, right? Talking about a provider being supportive of a VBAC, some positions, some techniques, some things that we could do to enhance or increase our chances for you to have a BBAC. But also, I felt like it was really important for Krystal and I, and even her husband as well, to have really tough conversations surrounding the trauma that took place from her first, because I wanted to help them heal from that experience, but also do the work so that when we walked into the birth space for this delivery, that not only you guys could be present and know that this can be a different experience, but for that to be healing as well. And so when trauma takes place in the birth space, it's really important to not kind of push those feelings aside, but rather to really talk through them, even though I know that it's not an easy or a fun conversation to have, but we had a lot of those conversations. I feel like, and do you feel like that part of the support was helpful in moving forward?
Definitely. Having the conversations. I knew going in that you were very honest, that going in, obviously there's nothing that we can do to stop, not having another C-section, but we were able to sit down and say, here's all these things that we can do. Here's the choices that we have. A lot of it during the conversations we have, I think stemmed back to just not feeling like I ever had a choice the first time around. So when we started talking about all of these choices and options, and one thing that really held to me too was, if you do end up having to have a C-section for whatever reason, here's some choices you even get in that. And I had no idea about some of the things that we could do if we ended up even needing to have a scheduled C-section. So there was a lot of tears in that process, talking through a lot of those conversations, but it certainly made it a lot easier, and a positive experience that second time around during that pregnancy, and looking forward to that birth.
Good. So through that work, we were preparing and talking about what a BBAC was going to look like and feel like, and all of the tools and decisions that we had to kind of discuss and work through. But in pregnancy and birth, there can be a lot of twists and turns. And so, Krystal, do you want to share kind of that next twist and turn in that journey?
Yes. So everything was going really, really well. I found a provider that I felt was very supportive in my decision to want a VBAC. We went through the medical records. We had a lot of conversations, and at the end, it seemed like I was going to be a perfect candidate for this. I was seeing that provider up until, I think it was right around 36 weeks. Everything seemed going really good. I was really looking forward to meeting my baby and having this experience, and being able to have such a different experience this time around. When I went in for my checkup, and the provider that I was seeing went, I don't think the baby's in the right position. Which had never really occurred to me. I had really thought the entire time baby was head down. And we went in for a quick ultrasound, and I was breech at 36 weeks. So that came as just a complete out of left field, a complete shock to me. And immediately, I was talking about options with them, tried to be very calm in the office with them. And, the provider they talked about a external version. So we talked about that, and, outside of, they were trying to be very positive with me. Baby can still flip at any point. They talked about spinning babies. So I started looking into some of that, and immediately reached out after the appointment, of course, to my doula, to Stephanie, to tell her we've got a problem, or what was a problem to me at that point anyway. Yeah. And that was kind of our first big twist and turn. We worked on a lot of the positioning. Stephanie helped me with some of that. I was seeing a chiropractor for a little while. And then we did, when that wasn't working, I know my provider was trying to kind of wait till closer and closer to my due date. A couple other twists and turns happened during that time frame. And I had always kind of had a feeling that I was not going to go to 40 weeks. They were really trying to push me out to 39 or 40 weeks. And Knowing the experience with my first, my water broke at 39 weeks, and I just didn't feel like I was even going to make it to 39 weeks with this one. Between that just strong gut feeling that I
mother
can't wait
intuition.
Yeah, mother's intuition already at that point. And then my dad died during this process as well. So it was right about that time frame. I went in for one of my appointments and they were trying to push me out a little bit longer. And I said, no, I want to schedule the external version right now. So we did that. They got me in that week. And we did that on a Friday. And it failed.
Well, and the thing is too, just for our listeners, sometimes, providers are wanting to push that external version as close to 40, well, usually between 38 and 40 weeks, because there is a risk that baby's heart rate will drop and not, baby will not respond well to that procedure because it can be intense. And so obviously if we're in a situation where baby doesn't handle that procedure well, we are automatically going to the OR to deliver baby at that time. And so there's always kind of this fine line where they're trying to find that sweet spot where baby still has some room to flip head down, but that if there is an emergency, baby is, full term and ready to be delivered. However, what I think is so important in this moment in your journey is this mother's intuition. And I think it's overlooked. And I think it's not considered with the weight that it should be, because you know your body and your baby better than anyone, better than your doctor, better than your doula, better than your husband. And I was so proud of Krystal to just, obviously it was a very emotional time, not only with finding out this news that baby was Breech and really desiring this different experience that you deserved, but obviously then to have the loss of your father and all of those emotions, plus our hormones are preparing for delivery. Like, it's a lot of things happening. And I was just so proud of her to just advocate and say, I know in my gut, I know in my heart that this needs to happen sooner rather than later. And so, yes, I attended the version with Krystal and her husband. And like I said, it's a different experience for every patient, but it is intense. It is not an easy procedure to endure as a mom, full-term pregnant mama. And so we focused a lot on positive affirmations, helping Krystal kind of keep her breath, try to relax her muscles, breathe, blow all of that intensity out. And she was so strong. They actually tried to flip baby both directions. Krystal was just, very courageous, very brave, and also very determined. And I think that's one of the biggest things that we talk about with our clients. Like, you have to, with any kind of birth, but for sure with a VBAC, like, you have to have your own individualized why, and it has to be strong, right? Because unfortunately we get faced with a lot of kind of walls and forks in the road, essentially. And your why was very strong. And you knew what you wanted, what you desired, and what you deserved. And so she was so strong through that procedure. And unfortunately it was not successful. And so do you want to kind of explain to the listeners what that felt like and kind of how that day unfolded for you after not only physically enduring that, but then the emotional letdown?
Okay, you guys, we're going to take just a brief break so I can tell you all about an amazing company, Body Ready Method. Body Ready Method is an amazing company that offers pregnancy and postpartum programs. I urge you to take a look at this, especially if you are wanting to stay active during your pregnancy and prepare for labor and delivery. This is also a great program to help heal and recover your body post-birth. You can go to howtomom.com/links and follow the Body Ready Method link from there. Okay, back to today's episode.
Yeah, physically, that was an experience I don't think I could ever quite describe or prepare anyone for. I know intense is the word used a lot, and it's about the best one I can think of as well. I was fairly heartbroken when we could not get baby to flip. And exhausted. I mean, from the experience, from the emotional toll of the last week or two, and the physical toll of that. So we just decided to stay low for that weekend, rest, which I definitely needed after that experience. And we started talking about what other options were. Because at that point I felt like I didn't have another option. It was going to be a scheduled C-section. So I went in and spoke with my provider on Monday. And she confirmed for me that was her provider office that was the only option at this point. We needed to schedule the C-section, but I could wait. I didn't have to schedule it right away. Again, they felt like, 39 weeks, give us a call, we'll, figure it out. And when I was pushing and asking for other options, she mentioned a provider that Stephanie had also mentioned. As far as both of them knew, the only provider in the Midwest area that does breech deliveries. And I didn't realize this was anything that could be done or was done at all anymore. And I think that was why I pushed the provider to see or asked them if they could, is because you had mentioned this other provider, and she brought up his name as well too. So after that appointment, I went home. This was Monday now. I went home and I called his office to see, at this late in the game, I think I was 38 weeks at that point, if they could get me in and talk to me about this. And the stars kind of all aligned. They said they took down all my information. They said they had to run my insurance and they had to check my case file and a few things. And it was probably going to be a couple days before they could get back to me. And I said, okay, it's all I can do at this point. And that evening, I was doing my car seat shopping to get ready for bringing baby home. And I was standing in Target with my oldest, and the office called me back and said everything went through really smoothly, and they'd love to have me come in on Wednesday and have a chat. I can't remember, a pre-visit, let's go over what this would look like. And look at your file. And I was elated. I was really excited to get it in on Wednesday. Hung up. And I will say, probably a very important part of the story, she called me back about 5 minutes later. I was still in Target, and said, hey, by the way, if anything happens before Wednesday, you can come to us. I was like, oh, okay, good to know.
Yeah.
And the next morning I woke up and my water broke.
Which is just like, not only did everything go through much quicker than they had anticipated and that you had anticipated, but that she called. Like, let's talk about some incredible patient care here. That it went through, I think it was like, wasn't it like 5 p.m.? I mean, it was later in the day.
Yep.
The call was made to say, hey, everything has gone through. Everything looks great. Let's schedule this consult. That in itself, amazing. But then that call back to say, hey, in the event that something might happen or could happen before your consult, know that you can come here. Know that you can call us, because otherwise you might have said, well, I haven't had that consult yet. I'm not technically a patient. I probably can't go there. Like, that in itself is just such a crazy part of the story. And I want to share too, as a doula, our job, one of our jobs, is to just provide information, to provide options. And that is going to look different for every client, but also it is not our job to make any assumptions for our clients to say, hey, I think they'd be interested in this information, or hey, I don't think they'd be interested in this information. That's not our job. Our job is to say, here's the information, here's the evidence, here are your options. What is your gut telling you? How do you feel about this? Do you have any questions about this information? And I feel like we had talked about this doctor at the hospital after the ECV. But again, as a doula, like, we have to be smart and strategic and professional about how we present information and when we present information, because it was a very emotional day and there was a lot that you endured that day. And I think I just kind of said, we can have this conversation at another time. I just want to let you know, and especially too, because I knew your story, I knew your why. We already had this very tight bond and this relationship because of the work that we had done up until that point. And I just said, hey, I want to let you know that if you were ever interested in thinking about a vaginal breech delivery, there is that option for you. And kind of left it at that. And then we talked a little bit more through that weekend about what that would look like and how and everything. And then, like you said, to then kind of have that conversation with your provider and then mention the same name as well. But that, as a doula, that's our job, is to say, here are the options, here's the information for you. And whether a client is interested or not, or takes that opportunity or not, that's not up for us to decide. We're just there to provide that information. And I was so happy that I did. And I was so happy to support you in whatever choice you made at that point. But of course, I was just very happy that you felt like there was an option and that you were able to look into that. And then it all kind of unfolded very quickly. And so woke up that morning, water broke. I got a text message from you, and also with you saying, they told me that to call them if anything happened.
Yep. So it wasn't even, I didn't even have a second thought at that point. That morning I called the new provider, and told them. They even sounded shocked, like, we haven't even seen you yet. But they're like, all right, come on down. Yeah. And we had to get my daughter on the bus and everything like that, getting the grandparents over, and labor had not started. So it was starting to be already a repeat of my first, or my water had broken and that was it. So we hopped in the car, we drove to this new provider, and they were about 45-ish minutes away. So it wasn't anyone super nearby, but I had no doubts we were doing the right thing at that point. Even knowing, some risk was going to come with this. And of course, not necessarily the outcome that I was hoping for, but all I could say, I was very excited. Just at the last minute, I thought the rug had been pulled out from underneath me. I thought I was done. I thought I had no other options. And at the last minute, basically, I was being given another path, another option to be able to potentially have the VBAC that I wanted. So,
and Krystal, that's so true. You never, and this is so important. You never looked back. You never questioned. You weren't kind of like, oh, are we doing the right thing? Are we not? And that's what's so important, is trust, right? Like, you listened to your intuition, you had the support, you had the team, we had done the work, and you trusted the process. And it was so powerful. Like, you led the team. We were just there to surround you. But I will say, even reflecting and looking back, you never looked back.
There wasn't any other option for me. This was what I was going to do.
Yes. Okay, so get to the hospital.
So we got to the hospital, and we waited around for a little while. Labor had still not started at this point. I think at that point with my first, labor had at least started, but it didn't. So, they were kind of busy at the moment, which, was probably good that I wasn't starting to labor. So we just kind of hung out for a little while, talked to the nurses. They did get me into a room, and I was able to meet with the new provider. Stephanie met up with us at that point as well too. And we were able to kind of have that quick consult that I was planning for the next day, kind of right there while I was my water broken in the delivery room. And I was immediately at ease with this provider, him and his team. So that was just kind of another thing that comforted me that I was making the right decision. I still felt like I was in the right place. Everything felt right.
Yes.
And so at that point, we just kind of were hanging out, waiting for some contractions to start. And I would say at that point, that's probably where another twist and turn kind of came, because it wouldn't start.
We were doing all the things. We were doing positioning. We were doing exercises. You were very patient. You know, it never felt pressured. We never felt like we were on the clock, or at least that's not the impression I got. But we were trying all the things.
Tried all the things. They talked about Pitocin. I really didn't want to do that. And I really was trying to avoid that. We did as much of everything as we could think of. And then they kind of asked again. And at that point, I know it was my choice. I still didn't want to take that choice, but it was my choice. And looking back on that, I still feel good because I made that choice and said, okay, we started Pitocin after dinner that evening. We just started it at a really, really low dose. And still wasn't starting. I remember Stephanie asking, hey, it's been a really long day. Can I run home really quick? Is, totally up to you. Gave us completely the choice. I'm like, well, nothing's going on here. That's totally fine. She ran home. They kept slowly increasing the Pitocin. She made it back, and I still wasn't having any contractions. At that point, we talked about, you've been up all day. It's pretty late. I want to say it was 10, 11 o'clock at night. Why don't we try to get some rest? So my husband took a nap. They found Stephanie a place to sleep. It was pretty amazing. She was able to go lay down.
Accommodations I've ever had.
My husband still jokes, or teases that she was treated better than he was, because he got the couch and she got an actual bed.
I love it.
It was just starting to kind of nod off. Of course, it's hard to sleep at that point, even though you need to, just because your adrenaline's racing and you're waiting for labor to start, and you're just excited. I was excited anyway for all of this. And I think I was just kind of starting to doze around 1 when I started feeling the contractions finally. And I waited about an hour trying to let my husband and Stephanie get a little bit of rest before they got too intense. I finally woke my husband up around 2. I probably threw something at him, get him to stop snoring, wake him up, and told him it's time. I need you to get up here. And a little after that, we woke Stephanie up, and they started getting pretty intense pretty quickly with the Pitocin. At that point, it starts becoming a little bit of a blur. Even today, looking back on it almost a year later, it's hard to believe that I never had any medication. We tried the CO2.
Nitrous.
No, not CO2.
Yeah,
the nitrous. There we go. CO2 is
Yeah.
totally not the right thing. The nitrous at one point, and that just didn't do what I wanted it to do. And I think I threw it.
Didn't love it.
But I did not like that. But no pain meds through that process. And I remained pretty calm, I think, for most of it. Stephanie really helped in guiding, and that was one of the things I really wanted with the doula, especially the VBAC, is like, what do? I don't know what to do. I felt like this was supposed to come natural, and it was not. I didn't know what to do. So, just guiding into different positions and having my husband jump in and try to help and comfort and massage, and in the bathtub, on the toilet, in the bed, on the birthing ball. We moved around a lot.
Wow.
And that probably helped keep me focused but distracted enough to get through labor until Like I kept telling Stephanie I had to go to the bathroom, and we realized I was in active labor, was active labor or whatever at that point, and I needed to push.
Yep. Baby was nice and low.
Yeah. So I remember switching to that, and that's probably when I wasn't nearly as calm anymore after a while into that.
You were pretty dang calm. You got into your rhythm and into your groove. And that's a really beautiful part of labor, whether it's unmedicated or not. If you feel safe, you feel supported, the people around you are caring for you and you can trust them, you are able to go to this place. And not that it's not intense and hard work, because it always is, but all of a sudden this like rhythm takes place and there's no interruption. You're just able to labor and know that everybody around you is helping. And you really were very calm and so strong.
It was, yeah, I some of it, I remember bits and pieces of it. It was a very interesting experience. I think you said just that. I mean, everyone in that room, you were there, my husband was there, a minimal amount of staff was there. And I just kind of was in my own place at that point, pushing and just trying to get my baby out to meet my baby,
Yes.
And
the position that you pushed in the most, just so that kind of listeners can hear this, to know that you were able to kind of follow your body and what it needed in that moment. And so what we did is we put the back of the bed all the way up so that Krystal could mimic kind of hands and knees, but without having to like put all of that pressure on her forearms and shoulders. So she was kind of leaning into the back of the bed and essentially pushing on hands and knees. And I remember standing pretty close to the provider and seeing that bum. Not a head, but her butt.
Yep. Wow, yeah. I mean, at that point, I think we pushed, I asked later, about 3 hours. It was probably about 2.5 hours in of pushing. And it just felt relentless. And I was getting pretty tired. And I felt and swear I almost heard a pop. And I screamed. And I tried to explain what happened, and the room went really quiet. And everyone's just kind of looking around, and the provider stepped up and talked very, very calmly. I remember that this is what everyone is thinking right now. And everyone is thinking, did her uterus just rupture? This is, why. Seems like the reason why they're always like, here's your big risk with a VBAC. This is why you should really have a C-section again, is your uterus can rupture. And he was very calm about it, but he was very honest about it. And said, this is what we're all thinking right now. Took a breath, and he's like, but you're not bleeding. Baby's heartbeat is fine. All the signs that we would normally see aren't here. So we think you're okay. Do you want to keep pushing? We pushed for, I pushed for, I want to say another 20 minutes or half an hour when her heartbeat dropped.
Hey guys, it's Stephanie Sinclair, founder and owner of How To Mom. I'm just interrupting today's episode to make sure you are well aware of all that How To Mom offers. We, of course, are a community and a support group for all moms at all stages of life, but we also offer a large variety of services that I wanted to make sure you are well aware of. We offer birth doula services, both in-person or online support. We have birth support groups with different birth packages to choose from. We also provide placenta encapsulation services, lactation services from our lactation counselors. We also offer postpartum services, birth planning assistance, belly casting. We have a registered dietitian, nutritionist. We also offer a variety of photography services from birth newborn and family packages. We truly have it all here at How To Mom. So please don't hesitate to reach out today to have a free consult and help us find the best way to support you in your pregnancy, birth, and postpartum journey. Now back to today's episode.
Well, it is emotional. And I will say I did end up having to go in for an emergency C-section at that point. After the last 24 hours, I was ready for it at that point too. Like, I do remember very clearly being like, oh my God, it's finally going to be over.
Well, and being able to, you know, in as much clarity as possible in that, you know, in that condition. I just remember the three of you, meaning you, your husband, and your provider, being able to come to this decision together and say, let's move forward. Which again is not an easy decision. It's not the result that you were desiring, but just so strong and courageous in saying, I did so much. You know, I did literally everything, stacked everything in my favor. And the reason why I referenced your cute baby's bottom is because you were right there. Like, you had done everything. And when you kind of say there's moments that you remember and moments that are a blur, it's so true. And I often say, like, birth is something that you will never forget, but you can't quite remember. That's the best way I can describe it. And yeah, it was a very emotional moment in the room. And of course, for you and your husband primarily. But what was felt so different about this location and this provider is, like, I often feel the heaviness with my clients, right? It's hard for me to not be on that emotional journey with them, but the entire room was on this emotional journey. We all, I think we all were feeling, you know, just this heaviness, right? Because you had done all of this work. You had come so far. We saw your daughter. She was right there. But again, that your description and being able to, even in an unmedicated position, pushing your baby for 3 hours, you were able to so elegantly talk about what you had felt, you know, and describe that feeling. And for the provider to be so calm and also talk through about, like, here are the other signs and here's what we look for, and giving you that option to say, do you want to, you know, try to keep going? But then, yes, things turned quickly thereafter.
It did. And it was a very small staff, very small provider, and they had me in the OR within 5 minutes of making that decision.
Mm-hmm.
And I just remember, you know, wanting it to stop, wanting the labor to stop, not feeling like, you know, knowing that something was going wrong. My body was still trying to push. I knew that they needed to put me under for the C-section this time, which I was okay with after my experience the first time around. And I remember just begging, can you please, you know, please, I want to go under. I want to meet my baby. I'm ready. And just looking at some of the, you know, contrasts from the first time around to the second time around, you know, the first time around, I just felt like a person in the room, and didn't have a lot of attention, everyone's attention on the baby. And this time around, I had someone kneeling next to me, talking to me the whole time while they were getting me ready and trying to keep me calm. And I remember that. I don't remember her face. I don't remember her name, but I remember her voice, and I remember her just talking to me, that she was there for me, which was huge.
So important.
In being able to process this one differently. Mm-hmm. And then I remember waking up.
Yep.
And that was probably the last major twist and turn of all of it. So we did all of the things, and we were super close, and did need to go in for an emergency C-section. But I felt far more supported this time around through all of it, but through the C-section too. And I remember waking up and just realizing not as much time had passed as I had thought.
Yeah. Feels like a long
and asking
time.
for my baby.
Mhm.
Where's my baby? Did I have a boy? Did I have a girl? I didn't even know at this point. And the person sitting there was really nice. She didn't share a lot. They didn't know a lot, or at least didn't want to share a lot until my provider could come in. And he came in and kind of gave me a big shock. My uterus had ruptured. And she had stopped breathing. That was, the heart rate had dropped. The umbilical cord had become pinched between her and my body. And when they pulled her out, she was not breathing. And she had to be resuscitated in the OR. And I'm just in a fog, waking up from anesthesia, trying to understand everything that's happening, trying, where's Stephanie? Where's my husband? Where's my baby? But they had resuscitated her. She was doing great. So I do want to assure everyone listening of that. That was really hard. And so some of those last pieces that I was really looking forward to, holding her right away, being able to nurse my baby right away, didn't get to happen either. The staff was amazing, and they had called Children's Hospital, and Children's had come out to get her, and they had already, I think they were in the process of getting her kind of hooked up when the provider was talking to me, which is, I think, why there was this delay. And they were able to wheel her in. She was in a cooling box. And they were trying to explain what was going to happen. They were, lowering her body temperature a little bit for a cooling therapy for the next 72 hours. They were bringing her to another hospital while I was going to stay there. All of these things, at least, were risks that I knew going in. It was still a shock.
Sure.
With all of that, they reassured me that she was looking really, really good, and she was responsive at that point, and they were able to, they didn't feel it was an emergency to rush her back. So they were able to wheel her in, and I was at least able to kind of reach over and touch her hand a little bit. And before they left, they let Devin in as well too. So we kind of talked through that, and
yeah. I know it's a really, really hard story to share. I think there are a lot of beautiful, joyous moments in her journey. But I know that there's a lot of heartache in her birth journey as well. And I think what was, the biggest purpose, I mean, many different reasons, but one of the biggest purposes in sharing this story is that, yes, there are still risks sometimes. And although the percentages or the likelihood of these breech vaginal delivery risks, even though they can be low, they are still there. And that can sometimes still be people's experiences. And so it's important to share that side of it as well. It's also important to share that we can be an active participant in our pregnancy and our birth, and we can stack all the things in our favor, but birth can be unpredictable, regardless of our provider, regardless of our doula, regardless of our spouse. And that brings us a little bit to a different direction of support and what that means to us in those moments as well. Like, when things are unpredictable and the risks take place, do we feel supported in that moment? Do we feel like we have the guidance? Do we feel like we're, walking with people through that? And I saw Krystal's provider, I think it was less than a week after her delivery. And you don't see this often, but we just hugged, her provider and I, because again, it's so important to have providers like that who give women options. But like Krystal said, and also just with my experience with my births, is did it go exactly how I wanted? Was it the exact outcome I wanted? No, but did I know that if I went unmedicated that I would have to go under general anesthesia? Did Krystal know? Was it explained to her what the potential risks are of a VBAC and then a breech vaginal delivery? And that I think gets overlooked, and that can be powerful, and that you still got to make that decision. I think can be huge. That doesn't mean every birth story is this perfect ending and this exact scenario that we plan for. But what it is how are we made to feel through that process? Were we given options? Were we able to make decisions for ourselves and for our babies? And I hope that is how you felt through the entire process, not only from your doula, but also from your provider. And I think that you did, and I think that that's important. And although there was trauma that came from this experience, do you feel like you were able to process and kind of deal with that trauma in a different way than you were from the trauma from your first, as a result of the support?
Yes. Yes. I'll always be sad. I'll always be disappointed that so much of what I was hoping for that second time didn't come to be. But the conversations that we had throughout the pregnancy about options, about, okay, if things go great, they go this way here, what are some of the risks? What does it look like if this happens? We talked about it. So there was so much more communication that the next time, in terms of what could happen, what will that look like? What are some options that I will get if that happens? That I'm still, even with what happened, ultimately, I'm still happy and supportive of the choices that I made. If I had never reached out to see what a doula could do for me the second time around, I would have ended up with a scheduled C-section again. And yeah, I ended up with a C-section after all, but I was happy for it this time, in a way.
It was a much different journey.
It was a much different journey, and I exhausted all of my options to get there this time, instead of feeling like I was told, this is your option.
Absolutely.
And that was it. I got to try.
And you let everybody know how your little girl is doing today.
She's doing amazing.
Awesome.
So for anyone, if that ever happens, just know she's 11 months today, actually.
I can't believe it.
And she's starting to talk. She's almost walking. We've seen no developmental delays due to the trauma of her birth. She's a very happy, smart, wonderful little girl.
And how lucky am I that I get to watch her grow so close. And I want our listeners to be reassured that when you treat with a trained provider, although this was an emergency situation, not only for Krystal, but also for her baby, they acted so quickly. They have policies and procedures in place. They are very well trained to handle these scenarios. And so both Krystal and her baby were handled with such amazing, supportive, but also extremely educated, medical trained individuals. And so, yes, there are risks that come with different types of birth, but they are trained professionals who know how to handle those emergency situations, and they got these two the care that they needed very, very quickly, while also giving options and being supportive. And so I think there's so much power in that, is that you can have both. I know that you are not able to hear our listeners today, but I know each and every one of them are so thankful that you have shared this story and journey, although very, very hard and emotional, because we deserve to hear real life birth stories. And they all can look very, very different. And I know that your journey was a roller coaster ride, but I will always be impressed and inspired by your courage, by your bravery, and just to be able to witness and support you through that meant so much to me. As somebody who is in a very different situation, but potentially could have had a twin who was Breech and then also went under general anesthesia for an emergency C-section. There's some similarities there, and you were braver than I ever could have been. So I'm so thankful to you for sharing. It's hard for me to talk about. I can't imagine how hard it is for you to talk about, but doing this is changing lives and inspiring so many women. So a thank you is not enough. And I know everybody listening right now is thinking the same thing. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Do you have any last words you would love to leave our listeners with after your story that you shared? And it's okay if you don't. I put you on.
I want to come up with something, great and inspirational, but I can't really think of much else. Just, if you want something, look at those options, talk to the people. If you're not comfortable with that provider, if they're not explaining things to you, you may not always like what they have to say, but if it doesn't make sense to you, go with your gut. At least look for a second opinion. It's okay. Even at 38 weeks, apparently.
So much to learn from your story for our listeners. So amazing advice. So thank you so much, Krystal. I hope you all had a box of Kleenex nearby for this episode, and thanks for listening.
All right, you guys, that is it for today's episode. I hope you enjoyed. If so, please subscribe to our podcast, comment, share, give us feedback. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to listen, and we will see you next time.